Please welcome to the stage founding executive director of the Partnership on AI, Tara Lyons. Harold F. Linder, professor at the Institute for Advanced Study, Alondra Nelson. Vice President of Global Affairs at OpenAI, Anna Makanju. Professor at the University of California, Berkeley, Hani Farid. And Head of Law and Policy, Technology Threats and Opportunities at Witness and 2020 Obama Leaders Europe, Raquel Vazquez Llorente.
I brought my crowd.
You have a fan section. All right, everyone. Good afternoon. We have an amazing panel for you today, and it's going to be a challenge. This conversation should really actually be called Weighing AI and Human Progress in 27 Minutes. So buckle up, because that's what we're going to try to do. I think I'll just start by saying that the video that just played was in some ways the perfect introduction to this conversation, because it really demonstrates just how many diverse perspectives there are held on AI, and not just by everyday users of the technology whose lives this technology is directly impacting, but also increasingly by institutions. And those include governments, civil society organizations, the companies developing AI in industry, and by scholars who have been studying this space for years from a lot of different ways, and those who are newly turning their gaze on AI as it proliferates. So I also just want to set the stage by saying there's been a long history of technology and policy development in this ecosystem, but I feel like interest in this space has really reached a fever pitch, and that interest is also being demonstrated by the global public policymaking community. Just this week, the Biden administration released a sweeping executive order focused on AI. The G7 released their guiding principles on AI via the Hiroshima process, and leaders gathered in the UK at Bletchley Park for the UK AI Safety Summit. And that was really all just in the last 72 hours. So this is a timely conversation. And I want to start with our panelists by basically just asking you all to introduce yourselves, because I've been in this field for a long time, and I've always been struck by the depth of relevance of AI to so many different equities, issues, and aspects of all of our lives, and at a scale that's truly global. And I think a good way to introduce this issue and our conversation today is really actually just hearing from all of you how you came to this work and why you think this technology is important. So please briefly introduce yourselves and answer why AI for you and for your organizations, and why now? Maybe start with you, Alondra.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am a sociologist of science and technology. I started thinking about this issue space because I was writing a book on the Obama administration. I was writing a book about people like Tara and President Obama, who brought to his 8 years in office an extraordinary vision for innovation, technology, and science. And I was very interested in projects like the Precision Medicine Initiative, the work that you all did on big data, and by the end of the administration by AI. So I was thinking about this as a scholar of science and technology and policy. And then I spent much of the last 2+ years, working in the Biden-Harris administration and working variously in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and really sort of taking up the baton from some of the work that you all had done in the Obama administration. I think it's in 2016 that you all do a paper on sort of economic opportunities in AI, a white paper. And so some of the work that we would come to do in the Biden-Harris OSTP would really be about thinking as sort of the transformations that AI is starting to bring got closer to us. How do we do that in a way that's equitable, that has equitable innovation, includes many people and voices, and it expands economic opportunity for folks? And so how we tried to think about that was sort of what is a values-based way to doing innovation. And we developed in the Biden-Harris administration a project, a white paper called the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights that's just been codified in part in this executive order that President Biden issued this week.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Anna.
For me,
But is it? Because it looks like you, and it's your face, but it's someone else's body. And you are naked. And you then consider withdrawing your candidacy for public office. This is the perspective that we come from at Witness. So Witness is an organization that works with human rights defenders and civic journalists worldwide, and we help them use video and technology to expose the truth, defend democracy, and protect their rights. Since 2018, we've been leading an initiative consulting these communities about the harms, the potential harms and risks that manipulated media and deepfakes can bring to society. And over the past year, we've been working with a wide range of stakeholders, artists, creators, fact-checkers, technologies, across many different countries and regions to understand how generative AI and large language models may affect their work, but most importantly, what are the solutions they want to see prioritizing? So that's the perspective that we bring to the table from Witness.
That's great. I'm going to pick up on some of the points you just made, Raquel, in service of our next question. So I think it's important to recognize that the moment that we're in right now builds on decades of progress, successes and failures both, in both practice and policy design related to rights, social justice, privacy, social media, and platform regulation, and much, much more. I'm curious to ask this panel what you think is different about AI and the environment we currently find ourselves situated in. And what lessons can we draw on that predated this moment that we think are going to be important to kind of scratch at here? And I also, before we answer that question, I think the other piece of context that I think needs to undergird this discussion is a recognition of the fact that we are in the early innings of what's going to be a very long game. And what AI looks like and how we understand the sort of cutting edge of technology today is going to be transformed rapidly. We right now, there's sort of a widespread obsession, for good reason, with large language models. They show up largely through chat interfaces, but we're going to wake up potentially in 24 months to a totally different technology ecosystem. There's going to be different machine learning paradigms that emerge that influence that. There's going to be policy decisions made that influence that. So with that as the backdrop, what is different about this moment, and what are we looking back on that is going to inform our solution generation going forward? Maybe you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
I mean, certainly what's different about this moment is that we have a very powerful tool that was introduced as a consumer product, almost a year ago. And I think it brought, many of us on the stage have been having this conversation for a very long time. And we know we have AI is in our iPhones, AI amplifies social media and our lives. I mean, so there's artificial intelligence sort of tools and systems all around us. But I think the introduction of consumer-facing tools sort of brought to the larger world the sense of the power of these tools and their ubiquity in a way that we didn't quite, I think, appreciate in total before. And so it both was, I think, that initial moment of about a year ago, thrilling and interesting. I mean, at their best, these chatbots are like fun and they're kind of, quirky and fun, and you can do fun things with them. But they also, I think, brought a lot of trepidation for a couple of different reasons. Trepidation because, to your question, Tara, about what are we learning from? We've just gone through sort of 15 years of a social media era in which we've seen quite a lot of damage to democracy, to the social fabric, and more. And so the trepidation is sort of, here we go again, and are we going to get it right this time? And what are the things that we need to put in place to get it right? And the trepidation also because, sometimes the tools are wrong. The tools hallucinate. There's already, evidence that the tools sometimes, discriminate and sort of amplify and exacerbate bias in life, things that big problems that we're already trying to grapple with in society. And so to make those worse, I think, is quite trepidatious for us. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think I think this is an opportunity, the fact that it's not just people who work in this space as educators or policymakers talking about this, that there's a wider kind of global conversation happening is really important, and I hope that we will seize that opportunity.
That's great. Go ahead.
I can build on what Alondra is saying,
yeah.
Because what we have identified from talking to communities across different countries is that there is something new, there is something old, and there is something borrowed when it comes about, at least from our perspective, audiovisual content in the context of generative AI. And if we're talking about something new, is that inconvenient truths are easier to dismiss. And what we are seeing is that the burden of proof, the burden of truth is now being shifted to those who are trying to hold the powerful to account. And as Alondra was saying, there is also something old here in the sense that is what we call cumulative disadvantage, that those communities that were already most at risk of discrimination or targeted because they belong to a particular group or gender or sexual orientation or race or ethnicity, here we are seeing that discrimination, marginalization, and vulnerability gets amplified with some of these tools, generative AI tools. And also to what Alondra was mentioning about social media, we see that there is something borrowed here, which is we are borrowing from the failures that we had with social media when we totally fail at including the voices of the global majority. And we designed technology without their voices, yet they were the ones bearing the biggest harms on them, right? So I think if I have to leave you with one thing today, it would be that this is, from the perspective of audiovisual media in the context of generative AI, this is not a crisis of just identifying what is fake, but of protecting what is true. Because when everything and anything can be dismissed as AI manipulated or edited, the question here is, how do we elevate the voices of those who are trying to protect democracy, like many of the people here in the room?
I was actually going to agree with what you said, Tara, which is that we are very much at the beginning still of this technology. And of course, we know that the tools are going to become more advanced, but less, I think one thing that we don't talk about as much is that right now, as much as ChatGPT, for example, is constantly in the news, the statistics we've seen, for example, in the US is that about, I think, 8% of Americans have actually tried it. So right now, actually, not that many people have interacted with it, and that will change. And of course, these tools are also becoming incorporated into the way a lot of companies work, into the way governments work. So it's also the mass incorporation of these tools, their interaction with each other, that's going to change a lot of things. But I think what is really different, and I see this quite clearly at OpenAI, which is that we're no longer coming to this with sort of the utopian belief that technology is inherently good. We understand all of the problems that my co-panelists were just raising, and we're working very hard to build on that from the beginning. And of course, we're being held accountable quite broadly by governments, by civil society, by academia. So the conversation looks very different than the conversation around technology 20 years ago.
I'm really glad to hear that, by the way. So from my perspective, there's a couple of things that are different here. So first of all, just to frame the technology revolution, the PC revolution, from mainframe computers to personal computers, took about 50 years. We thought that was fast, by the way. The internet revolution took about 25 years, the mobile revolution took 5 years, and it took about a year for ChatGPT to get 1 billion users. 50, 25, 5, 1, it's accelerating at a pace that we don't fully understand. So when things move that fast, it's very hard for us to keep up with that. That's number one. And number two is when you look at the core technologies of AI, there's really two pillars. We've been talking about generative AI, which is the fake images, the fake videos, and the ChatGPTs. And then there's the predictive AI, which is the sort of more quiet behind the scenes. Predictive AI, how does that work? Well, in the courts today, in this country, people are ingesting data about somebody who's been arrested, and then making decisions as to whether they should be given bail. People are using predictive AI to make hiring decisions. They're using predictive AI to make loan decisions. And that predictive AI is based on historical data. So if your historical data is biased, which it is, against people of color, against women, against LGBTQ community, well, guess what? Your AI is going to be biased. And so when we push these systems without fully understanding them, all we are doing is repeating history. Now, on the generative AI side, understand that the reason why generative AI works is not because we've invented a new widget. It's because we've taken billions of pieces of data, of text, of images, of video, of audio, of human creation, and we've shoved that into a machine and have taught it how to create content in our likeness. And so earlier on, you heard President Obama talking about the economy and what it means to the disruption. And so these AI systems don't exist without us. And that is a very new type of technology because it is very much a data issue, less so than it is a computing issue.
That's an interesting point. The inherency of humanity in them is sort of ironic, right?
I like that.
And the inhumanity.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Something to ponder. All right, so I want to take us somewhere mentioned by President Obama in his speech just a few minutes ago. We have a really multi-sector group up here, very much on purpose. I think there's increasing recognition that we need a plural and deliberative approach when it comes to driving the best outcomes from AI, spanning law, policy, regulatory development, practice within industry, building an evidence base in the research realm, and advocating for a representative array of solutions via civil society. So how do we build a more robust working relationship between these diverse perspectives? How do institutions of democracy further need to evolve in order to adapt to technological change? If you're interested in taking your answer there, I'd be curious what your take on that is. And importantly, I think, what role does multi-sector influence have to play in that project? Does anyone want to start us off? Okay. Everyone's pointing at Raquel.
I actually wanted to build 1 second on what you were mentioning because you brought up two such key issues, which is one is that AI is forcing us to think about the balance of individual rights and collective rights. Because these harms are not only individual, they are also collective, and AI relies on data aggregation. So I think this is going to be a challenge moving forward. And the other thing that you mentioned that really resonated with the work that we are doing at Witness and my work is how we think about our own likeness. Because not all AI audiovisual manipulation is harmful, right? There are uses like political satire, like creativity, activism, even identity protection. And those uses need to be protected and celebrated. But how do we think about our likeness, something that is so intrinsic to us as human beings, and moving forward, like how do we protect our likeness from those targeted attacks for non-consensual sexual imagery that is synthetic, for instance, and how do we protect as well audiovisual manipulation that has satirical use? So, like, I thought like it was so important that you brought that up. And then on your actual question of, I think for future-proofing democracy, again, going back to that framework that I like using, is like there is something new old and there is something borrowed. And there is something new in the sense that, yes, we need new legislation and new policies at the companies, but we are not going in the blind. And like, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I will not go out away from this big stage without mentioning that I think one of the most important socio-technical skills moving forward is going to be those people who can translate our international human rights framework into AI policies and legislation. And then to wrap it up from my side, like, I think in terms of something old that I was mentioning as well before, is that I don't think it's technological progress if we are leaving people behind. That is not progress. That is an illusion of progress that is perpetuating systems of oppression and inequality. So with technology, it's not how far you go, but how many people are you bringing with you? So, and if we are talking about the borrowed part, I think Alondra mentioned it beautifully before. I think here is where we want to bring, when generative AI is so much hype, we need to bring those reasoned voices that have lived experience, that have harms, that they are not necessarily AI experts themselves, but I think we need to create these processes, and at Witness we've been consulting communities since 2018, and it's not only centering their harms, but also centering the solutions they want to see prioritizing.
I was just going to say that, so one really interesting thing about this technology is steerability. So as Hani mentioned, there is an enormous amount of data that goes into sort of creating the technology's ability to think. But the difference is that now we have an entire different process, which is the post-training process of these models that allows us to steer its behavior in certain directions. And so we spent a lot of time thinking, like, when we are steering it, what are we steering towards? So we have, and many partnerships of sort of bringing in organizations from the outside with certain expertise to think about where this technology can go and how we make sure that it doesn't sort of, reflect biases or do the types of harmful things that we, could imagine it doing. We also have, human trainers that we try to make as diverse as possible and bring in so that they are, part of the building. And we gave $1 million in grants to do a bunch of experiments and democratic input, because if we are trying to build a technology that's going to benefit everyone, then we really have to figure out what are the mechanisms that we can use that are novel for this novel tool that allow us to have as broad an option for style input as possible. And of course, Partnership on AI, other multi-stakeholder organizations that work on this are going to be really critical to this conversation. And I couldn't agree more that the more people we bring to the table here, the better.
That's great. So we have just a few minutes left.
I'll do a quick one and give you the last word. I'm an educator. I'm a math nerd. I think you should take multivariate calculus. I think you should take linear algebra. I think you should take probability. All that stuff is great. I know. I knew that was going to get a laugh. But here's the thing. If you're going to be an engineer and if you're going to be a computer scientist, you got to take a course in philosophy. You got to take a course in history. You got to take a course in world religion. Like, you got to learn about the world. I think for a long time we thought technology was like Las Vegas. What happens on the internet stays on the internet. It is no longer true. You got to understand that your technology is impacting real people and real lives, and you got to understand those lives.
All right, bring us home, Alondra.
Oh my gosh, how
No
do I
pressure.
follow all this? Well, I want to go back to Hani's point, because I think part of what needs to happen for more people to be at the table is for us to really demystify these tools and systems, right? So Professor Fareed said we had the mainframes, and then we had the personal computers, and then we had the mobile revolution in our iPhones. We don't think of any of those things as being sort of magical and out of our reach, right? In fact, they're just more work-a-day. Like, your phone is almost an appendage of you, and you think you control it, and you have a sense of agency around that. And we should feel that way around AI. I mean, fundamentally, particularly with generative AI, as they're being developed, these are kind of general purpose tools that can be used in lots of different ways. So that means as these tools are being built out and developed by companies like OpenAI and others, they might intersect your life in a lot of different ways and a lot of different facets of your life, from entertainment to education to healthcare. And all of us should have something to say about all of those places where these technologies sort of have a role and a growing role to play in our lives, particularly because they require a lot of data. There are privacy implications. There are implications about security and whether one wants to consent to having your data used and the like. So I want I want people to understand them really just as tools and to sort of demystify. And then lastly, I would say that people really need to, after kind of accomplishing that demystification, really be willing to sort of step into the conversation and not be intimidated out of the conversation. And so, you should learn multivariate algebra, but you don't have to have.
That's not what I said.
What did you say? What did you say, Professor Reed? Learn the maths, people. So learn the maths.
And the human rights law.
And other things.
And other things. But even if you're not an expert in mathematics and a distinguished professor like Professor Fareed, you can have an opinion about this very powerful tool that's going to accomplish a quite significant social transformation, and that we have choices to make as a society about what we want our future to look like and how we want these tools to be used in that future. And it really is going to fall to all of us and all of you to do that work.
Well, you did a beautiful job closing for me, so thank you so much. That was a perfect ending, I think, to this panel. The key takeaway being step into the ring. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.